Okay, I think we can start. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Welcome to this lecture. Today we'll be talking about the budget cuts to education. I think most of us have been aware of the horrendous budget cuts that we've seen. The numbers on the screen, 1 billion euros this year alone. And we will talk about how these budget cuts to education are related to the increasing militarization that we see in this government, but also how this is connected to our fight for free Palestine, and as well as the suppression of student and staff movements that we've seen the past year in the Netherlands. I will hopefully not talk so long so that there's enough room for discussions and people can share their perspective on things like militarization, etc., because I know there's a lot of different opinions. But first, let's put these budget cuts of education into a broader perspective, because as you can see, it's not only higher education that faces severe budget cuts. It's also culture, 350 million, other education, so that's primary, high school, and MBO, 650 million, public health and sports, 250 million, and pandemic preparation, 300 million. You would think that after the COVID pandemic, the government would have learned something and prepared for the next pandemic, but instead they cut this budget by 300 million. And especially noteworthy is the fact that the state budget grows with 34 billion euros. So it's not like we're in some sort of economic crisis or a situation in which all different sectors have to cut money because we just simply do not have enough money. No, the opposite is true. Our budget grows, but we only see these cuts to social sectors that are very important for a lot of people: education, healthcare, sports, etc. So naturally, you would wonder, why do we cut so much money on important things if our state budget is increasing? Luckily, I suppose our ministers are quite explicit and transparent about where this money is going. The top quote is by Hertzberger from NSA, who says that even though these cutbacks are very unpleasant, they are forced. They use the word forced. They have to cut money because they have to invest heavily in defense. And the Minister of Education, Apple Bruins, also from NSA, also said the cabinet has other priorities, defense, but also purchasing power and looking after the treasury. So from these ministers basically tell us where this money is going. We have to cut down money on education, healthcare, sports, culture, because we have to invest in defense, in military. Well, how much exactly can be seen from this graph, I think. So you see the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science is the top one, and defense the bottom one. And you see that over a period of 5 years, the budget of the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science goes down with 11 billion, whereas defense goes up 37 billion. The 37 billion includes one time an additional 8 billion euros to defense. So we see massive increases in our budget to defense, 40% extra per year. These are basically yearly budgets. So every year, 40% more money will go to the military in 2029. These numbers are not even fully into perspective, because the number in 2024 was already way higher than it was, for example, in 2015. So basically, over the last decade and a half, we see there's billions more euros going to the military, to defense, and to weapons. And if you take one thing away from this lecture, we want you to take away the following slide, because these weapon companies, but also ministers of defense and other people who say that it's good that we're spending so much money in the military, their arguments are basically, we need so much in the military because it would mean we're safe, there's peace, there's justice, and in our eyes, this is not true. As we will see in future slides, you have to ask yourself, it's about the safety, peace, and justice for who. What we say instead is that this increase in spending in the military is about profits. Profits, of course, directly for the weapon company who earn more money if we put more money towards defense because they are the ones building the weapons. But indirectly, there's a lot of people who profit from the weapon industry being very powerful, being very rich. So in general, we see the military spending as a way for rich people to have their imperial interest, to fight wars in which they protect their interest instead of fighting for our safety. And you can see that as well from the Defense Nota, which is basically the document that the government publishes explaining why they're investing money in defense, where they're investing it, etc. And you see that their way to peace doesn't include any of the forms that we would think be associated with peace and safety. Namely, there's zero mentions of diplomacy, de-escalation, demilitarization, anything in that direction. Basically, what they're saying is we can only be safe if we put more money into weapons, if we use sort of this argument where if we're very powerful and very scary, then no one is going to attack us. That is basically their only way to safety. But I think that, of course, over the last decades, we've seen multiple times again that the way Western countries use their military is not for safety or to protect human rights or any of these other reasons that they would give. They use these arguments very selectively when it sort of suits their imperial interest. Of course, we've seen this in multiple countries, in whether it be Libya, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. But currently, of course, the main place where we see this hypocrisy of how our military acts is in Gaza, where the Netherlands keeps on supporting the genocidal regime of Israel. Basically, every day we wake up and we see Israel do something worse, commit another war crime, ban another humanitarian aid organization in the north of Gaza. I think the last hospital is barely functioning or not functioning at all anymore. And the Netherlands is not only silently supporting this or sort of staying out of the situation. No, we are actively supporting Israel, not only diplomatically, but 2 weeks ago, the Dutch ministry approved of a 250 million euro deal with Israel, buying weapons from the war manufacturer Rafael, and they can sell these weapons basically saying they're combat proven or like they've been tested in Gaza, and now that means they can sell them for a higher price because it sort of shows that it works. So this comes back to our point of the way we're spending on the military is not to protect humanitarian values or democracy or whatever other things they might say. Why we have to spend more money in the military, that we have to protect ourselves against these evil forces, is what they say. But in the meantime, we support the most evil of all, who are basically ethnically cleansing a whole population as we speak in front of our eyes. There's no denying it. And still we send money. So that shows the hypocrisy of the argument that we need to send money to the military. Instead, why we, of course, support Israel as Western countries and the Netherlands as well, is to protect our imperial interest in the resource-rich region. That is the Middle East. And as you can see, as we see every day that people in Gaza are starving, do not have access to basic needs, etc. The Minister of Defense, Brekelmans, said, yeah, human rights are important, but Israel needs the F-35. The F-35s, the court said that we cannot send them to Israel because there's too high of a risk that war crimes or human rights violations are committed with these fighter jets. But our Minister of Defense is still pushing to send these fighter jets to Israel. And I think this quote alone gives a very telling story of how the Netherlands views its military operations. we do not care about like the human rights are sort of pushed aside when our imperial interests are at stake. And I guess to add to this as well is that the arguments for safety and peace are, of course, also, we can see by the way how Israel attacks not only Gaza, but also how it's acting in the West Bank, in Lebanon now, towards Iran. This is not a way towards peace, even if you wouldn't consider, of course, all the horrible moral implications that Israel brings to it. If you only look at it from does this lead to escalation or de-escalation? What Israel is doing, of course, leads to a lot of destabilization and escalation in the Middle East. So also the argument for we need a strong military because then there's peace and safety, etc., doesn't hold. By the way, we act in this genocide and keep supporting it. Okay, so I don't think I have to talk for too long about how horrible war is. I think that's kind of self-explanatory, but I think it's still important to note the differences between who is most affected by war. Because we see that the most wars now play also out along the lines of old colonial dynamics. We see that the global south suffers the vast majority of the wars and the casualties and the destruction. I think we saw the hypocritical responses when all of a sudden Ukraine was also in the situation where it was almost as if people here couldn't believe that Europe also is involved in the war. But yeah, so apart from, of course, the death, destruction, starvation, illness, all the horrible things we see in war, the military industry does also have horrendous effects on the climate. It's one of the most polluting industries with the bombs they drop, but also the fuel that are used for tanks, for fighter jets, for the boats, etc. And again, with these climate catastrophes, it's again the countries in the global south that suffer the vast majority of the consequences of the climate crisis. And as we see as well slowly happening here now with the increasing militarization that our government wants to implement, is that it comes at the cost of our social services, education, healthcare, culture, sports, these things directly have to pay for these weapons, these bombs which we bomb other countries and leads to more climate catastrophes. It's a cycle that only destructs. And to contrast that, there's of course the perverse reality that some people earn their money by these wars. We see the arms industry, the weapon companies, their stocks go up during time of war. And of course, it's not only these weapon companies, it's also the companies that make the technology for these weapons, or banks that invest money in the stocks of weapon companies, etc. So it's all related. And also, in case of wars, it will not be the kids of rich people who will be going to the war. There will be working class people who would have to go into the military and have to fight in the war. And very shockingly, this militarization of our country doesn't only relate to how the resources are allocated, because we saw already a lot of money is being spent in defense instead of in these social services. But also they want companies and institutions such as universities to put themselves in such a position that they're interesting for weapon companies. I think this is a very telling example of an article that was published last week. Because so in the Netherlands, you have this advisory board, in this case, Advisory Council for Science, Technology and Innovation. And they bring out these big documents, basically giving advice to the government and to universities, telling them sort of, you should do this because we think this is a good idea. Well, the CEO of Thales is on this advisory board. And last week they brought out this advice saying that universities should work more closely together with defense industry and they said basically that all faculties, whether it be engineering, mathematics, physics, all the way up to cultural and language studies, that universities should structure their education and science in such a way that it's interesting for the defense industry. Coming from the CEO of Thales. Normally, if you would hear something like this, you'd be like, that is a weird form of belangverstrengeling. I don't know what the English word is. Like you're incentivized to advise a certain thing. It's like the CEO of Calvé would say, okay, make your university in such a way that we can make a lot of peanut butter. And he would be like, yeah, that's bullshit because you profit from that. But if the defense industry does it, our own chairman, is on the same advisory council and he supports this. So in this document, they also say a mental and cultural shift of universities. So what this means is that basically they're saying universities should change the whole identity of a university, which is doing science and education for a peaceful, more sustainable world, has to change in such a way that universities are places that are interesting for these weapon companies that can, as we saw, they destroy countries, they destroy the climate. But still, universities should become sort of a research department for them, is what this advice says. And this, what I've been telling so far, is only the beginning, because in the Netherlands, of course, there's a lot more money going to the military now, to weapon companies, etc. But for some people, it's still not enough. So as you can see, the top one, some people are arguing that not 2% of our GDP should go to the military, to defense, but 2.5%. And also the same Minister of Defense, Brekelmans, that I talked about before, has said the following, that the old conscription will not return immediately, but they're looking for a service model that provides for measures with a gradually more mandatory character, meaning that slowly but surely they are starting to put the mandatory army service in place again that we got rid of. Power is one of these generals, and as you would expect, he's also arguing that we should put more money into the military, 3 to 6%. So he said during the Cold War, we put 3 to 6% into defense. But it's also the ministers from all sorts of political parties in the Netherlands, even GroenLinks, which supposedly is the Green Left Party, which in practice is not really the case, but they're also arguing for a switch to a war economy. So we see on all these different levels that there's people arguing for more money to the military, potentially a mandatory army service, and there's basically very little opposition currently in the Dutch government. Even I saw last week there's a law accepted that the 2% NATO is now that's a law. You always have to spend at least 2% of your GDP on the weapon industry, on military. So even if there would be a different political party in charge, they still have to spend 2%. They basically depoliticize the military spending. They're basically saying whatever political belief you can have it, but you can never have a belief in which we spend less than 2% in military, which is quite a wild thing in my eyes. And basically the only argument for this is sort of the fear mongering of China is scary, Russia is scary, Iran is scary. We have to protect ourselves. That's basically the argument that they give, but they do not give any other options or think of other ways we can achieve peace than through spending billions of euros in the defense industry. So what can we do? Of course, the first thing that's very important is education. I think one of the things that shocks me most about following the Dutch news is how little we see reported on this, because everyone is talking about all the scandals, because there's a lot of scandals in Dutch politics. And of course, the migration policies get a lot of attention, deservedly so. But there's very no publications. Basically, everyone's just accepting that this is the way it has to be. But as you saw, 40% increase of spending on the defense, the Ministry of Defense, is a huge increase. And there's, of course, there must be different opinions, but we do not see them. We only see basically that everyone's like, yeah, that's acceptable. That's just the way how it is. So that's why we also wanted to give this lecture to, first of all, bring this to consciousness that so much money, because I think a lot of people on the 14th will protest against these budget cuts, but they might not know where this money is going. Why are we even cutting money on education? So that's the first step. We will have lectures on imperialism. So I referred to it a few times already that these wars are just to protect the imperial interests of Western countries mostly. But in this lecture, we will dive deeper into how, for example, the suppression of Palestine has served the imperial interests of these Western countries. We will also have a lecture on border policies because the Ministry of Defense is not only the army, but it's also the fact that in Europe we're militarizing our borders more and more, which of course lead to deaths and suffering all over. Second of all, we would all advise you to get organized, whether it is a pro-Palestinian group or an anti-capitalist group or a peace group, anti-war group. We have to come together because on our own we cannot change that much. But if we come together in groups, we learn together, we demonstrate, we do actions, etc., we can achieve more. One of these ways to get organized is to join the union, which has been also pushed a lot by the protest on the 14th because it's organized by the student unions and the unions who are there for scientists and teachers, etc. But within a union, we can politicize the union then and have more power. Basically, the same idea as getting organized. If we work together, we can achieve more to fight this imperialism. And to give you some hope, I think maybe some of the people here were at this protest. I don't know.
Ik ben jong. Serieus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Somewhere.
Yeah. Because in 1983, maybe you can tell what this protest was about.
Against the how do you call it? The nuclear arm. And there were, I think, 80,000 people there.
80,000? More than 500,000.
Yeah, okay. It girl.
He counts only 80,000.
But so yeah, in 1983, the biggest protest ever in the Netherlands was against the placement of nuclear weapons in the Netherlands. With 500,000 people, I don't know how many people there were in the Netherlands then, but that must have been a significant amount of
14, 15.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's a sort of a hope that a lot of people share this anti-war sentiment, and that if we come together, we can make our voices strong. Because again, we do not benefit from any of these wars. How much they want you to believe that this is for our safety, this is not for our safety, this is for their interests, and thus we have to stand up that we do not want any war because we do not profit. We only lose from wars like this. Also, more concretely, there will be 2 protests coming up. So the protest against budget cuts in education will be on the 14th of November. I think all classes are cancelled because the university also supports this. They have free transport, so we urge everyone to go to this protest for sure, because we have to show this government that we cannot accept these budget cuts, and hopefully this pressure will also add to hopefully make this government fall, or at least make it more likely. But we would also urge you to bring this message to the protest. We will be going with a lot of Palestine groups, making this connection that yes, we are against the budget cuts, but we are also against the militarization and the way students have been treated by their governments. A few slides ago, I talked about how this advisory board sort of said that universities should change more in a way that they align with the defense industry. In our conversations with the board about their ties to Thales, which commits multiple war crimes in many different countries, but also to Israeli universities that make these horrible crimes by Israel possible. We see the same sort of pattern where our university would rather use violence against their own students, would rather censor their own students than that they would act in a way which is according to their principles. Basically, their principles, they say, we want a peaceful world, we want a sustainable world. But when it comes down to it, they would rather shut down their own students and staff. And we've seen this all over the Netherlands. So we want to bring this message that universities should stay universities and should stay true to their principles at this protest, this education protest. So if you go to the protest, make a banner saying something like fund education, not genocide, something in that direction. And yeah, we will also meet up there with a lot of pro-Palestine people. There will be Palestine flags, etc. So yeah, please come, bring your keffiyeh, bring your flags, bring your banners, etc. And then on the 21st of November, there's a wapenbeurs, like an army fair, in which these weapon companies will present their weapons and tell people how cool they are and that they should buy them, etc. And there will also be a big protest here. So if you can make it, it's the 21st of November. I think it's a Thursday as well. Yeah, please come here as well, because we have to give a counter voice to these weapon companies with all their money and all their power, and have to show them that we do not want them to sort of brag about how great their weapons are. But yeah, that was the presentation. For now, we have space for discussion. I guess we can do it Q&A style, but also, yeah, I guess I just wanted to have the opportunity to have a discussion, because I think also, I don't know, maybe there are some people here who have different views, who think that militarization is the way towards peace and the way to confront these difficulties in the world. And then please share that as well. So yeah, does anyone have any questions, any points they want to bring up?
So even earlier on, when you were showing some of these articles, we saw that in the tags and the web search, the last few were ASML and artificial intelligence.
This one?
That's exactly what it is.
Yes.
The reason this catches my eye, something that I'm generally bothered by, is that, especially in technical universities, even when we're not talking about militarization, let's say industrial policy of the Netherlands is moving towards a kind of within Netherlands and generally within Europe kind of production.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus now is on microchips, right? And one of the biggest applications for those is indeed rockets and guiding systems.
Yeah.
And in artificial intelligence, it's a similar story. What is it, the random system that Israel is now using, has been using for about a year, is completely automated.
Yeah.
Right? So even when this isn't specifically funding military deals or militarization or purchase of weapons or whatnot, the course that a lot of this research and development is taking is in arming, is in making better weapons. Let's say.
Yep.
Or maybe even not better, given that what we know about the F-35 is that at least for most of its life it didn't work.
Mm.
If it rained, the kit would drop. So maybe just more expensive weapons, right? Which makes me wonder what the alternative is. I mean, I feel optimistic when I look at some of the other stuff that the university does, for example, ITC. Right? There's a lot of courses and programs that are specifically geared towards, for example, monitoring.
Yeah.
That could still have other applications, but at least for the most part, it's not exactly in that direction. However, given the general sort of direction that the Netherlands is taking in Europe in general, I'm wondering if there is a different, if an alternative can be presented within these efforts.
Yeah.
So that a different course could be possible.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Also with the conversations that we've had with the board, in a lot of these kind of things like artificial intelligence or chip technology, they would say like, yeah, it's double use. We just make the technology, and then they try to stay as far away as possible from any ethical implications. They would just be like, oh, we're making cool gadgets, and yeah, it's not up to us what people do with it, basically, right? But I don't think they're completely neutral in that either. They just follow whatever pays money. Like I think these universities are just fully integrated into the capitalistic system where they, like you see now as well, they don't get a lot of money from the government. They just have to survive basically, and they strike these deals with ASML. Like in this same advisory board is also the vice president of ASML. And he was also talking at the academic opening this year. So you see how powerful these companies have become in universities. And I think almost fundamentally that means that universities lose their main identity. In my eyes, at least, the main identity of a university is different from a company, right? Like I go to this university because I just want to learn, do science, and apply it in a way that might not be the most beneficial money, like financially, but it's what I think it leads to the best world in whatever way you want to define that. So I think universities are losing that identity. And what you say, the alternative, I personally hope that people will start to realize how universities are becoming companies and start their own, like start something new that is what a university used to be. But I guess maybe that's naive to say in this capitalistic, like how are we going to start something which isn't sort of bound by money? We would have the same problem because you have to pay for this somehow, right? Which is a good question. I guess it would need like a big change in the system, I suppose. Because the idea is that the government kind of protects universities, right? Like they would fund them to such a degree that companies or universities are not dependent on companies. But yeah, as you can see with governments like we have now, that's not really what's happening.
Indeed, there are different times now, and I must say, you just showed a picture of the 80s. It is big demonstration. I studied in the late 80s over here at this university. And from that time, I know we had here a center for peace studies funded by the university itself. And it was quite a famous group in the whole of the Netherlands. When I say that I studied here, or I tell people that I studied here in Twente, they say, oh, that is that university with the boerderij, which is still an existing building over there. But that was then a center for simulations, for diplomacy classes, etc. What was happening there. At the same time, this university had a rule that in contact with companies and contract research, it was ruled out that any research would be done with there was a double negative, so a double negation in it. So it starts in Dutch. Het was onderzoek waarvan de resultaten, waarvan op voorhand niet zeker is dat de resultaten niet voor militaire doeleinden gebruikt zullen worden. So that was really ruled out that one should prove that there was no military application of this product, and then it could go on with the equipment. There was even a procedure that if one member of this university community would say, hey, but that contract research has a military application, that there was a rule that would appoint and there was a commission, etc., etc. That ruling was, that procedure was used only once by me, because there was some research in the nuclear arms connection, there was a huge discussion here in the university. Even the front pages of national papers were involved, and the rule was rolled out, so to say, after that, because that was not good for the contact with the business that any students at the university could make so many problems. But I mean, it's just, it's a little bit grandpa tells a story, but I mean, there were times that indeed there was here a huge peace research thing, and I think that in context with the university board, that might be something to because I completely agree that everything that has to do with international tensions, etc., it's only defense and manufacturing of weapons, and not doing anything in the research of peace research, diplomacy, etc., etc. And I think that universities, even technical universities, have something to offer in that direction as well. And that can be some alternative to present to the university boards and tell them to deep in their archives to see what happened at that time, and even this long ago.
Yeah, it's also interesting because I feel like the policy then was the opposite of what it's now. Like then you had to sort of prove that it wasn't related to any bad things, and now they're basically, you cannot prove that it will be used for anything bad, so not our issue, kind of. And I think that's very problematic. And do you know how this peace institute ended at the university, or was that way later after you were?
No. You know, at the end of the 80s, the wall fell, and peace issues, and that was completely out of the blue. I mean, even these big peace movements, they disappeared shortly after the 80s. So I mean, that was a simple. So the staff working there was much more than oriented to technology assessments, but was in the same direction, so to say. So what are the effects of technical research? But so the staff really redirected its orientation towards. And after that, I think the whole institute now is integrated in the, what is that department where philosophy and social sciences are?
BMS department.
Okay. That's after my time, but so I think that there are some remains of this group of them.
Yeah, it would definitely be good to talk with the board about this. I don't know how likely they are to take it, but we can try.
Yeah.
Any more questions or points?
A question about your regional activities. Because now you are very much from the national politics, but you have also regional issues. And I think it would also be a good idea to do something on a regional level. You also to reach, and you have more to reach the regional press.
Yeah.
But that's also a lot easier than the person. Then it's also more easy to get the local people involved.
Yeah, like program-wise, you mean?
That's not only the university, which is the top island.
No, I 100% agree.
Okay.
Of course, we have now the Palestine group on campus, which I think is the first real activist group in a while. And we also try to make a connection more towards the city, or at least that's one of the plans we have to get people all over the this region involved. I suppose that the Palestine group, of course, is a different kind of. We maybe need some education for certain people to see the link to militarization in general. I think they're very related, but maybe not everyone sees that. But yeah, in general, I agree we should try to organize here more as well, whether it be educational activities or protests. Good things.
Yes, it's a good occasion because now we have, of course, the airport, the Twente, and it maybe becomes a military base again with the joint strike fighters.
They want to make this the airport here a military base.
That's not sure. It will be decided in a few months.
Okay.
But there's already a lot of protest
Yeah.
from local people.
Yeah.
So you could also try to connect with them.
Yeah.
And most part of people are not really anti-militaristic, but more not in our backyard people.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why people are against militarization.
Yeah.
We can all put them together and
Sure.
create a big group. That's also what we hope with this protest, because a lot of people protest now for the budget cuts in education, and we hope for people to see the link now and then also come to these protests against militarization, and not only protest for things that affect them directly, I suppose.